And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Brit Elders, investigative author and documentary filmmaker who has traveled the world exploring a variety of topics, including the unique ET contact case of the Swiss farmer Billy Meier. She also happens to be the CEO of ShirleyMacLaine.com. Brit, thank you for joining me and welcome.
No, thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, we are excited to have you. And Brit, if you don't mind, can we just start with your own personal history and how you got into this work?
Yeah. As far as UFOs, we had a company called Intercept, which was an electronic countermeasure company. We basically kept Fortune 500s and banks secure from wiretapping and eavesdropping. So we had an investigative background. A friend of ours, Lieutenant Colonel Wendell C. Stevens, came to us with the most amazing photographs, which my husband Lee and I looked at and went, oh, they're too good to be true. We sort of set it aside. He came back to us about 6 months later and said, I just got back from Switzerland and meeting a man named Billy Meier, and we need to get involved with this on a true investigative level. We had a belief that no matter what you were investigating, whether it was murder one, counter-espionage, whatever, you followed basic criteria. You followed the evidence. Your purpose as an investigator is not to make a judgment call and say, oh, I like it or I don't like it, but to examine the evidence and present it. So that's what we decided to do. We went to Switzerland. We met with Meier. It's quite an interesting trip because we had business in London. We thought we would just pop over to Switzerland, spend a day, debunk the whole case, and leave. So much for that idea. We were there 5 days. And in that period of time, Billy gave us photographs, movie footage, metal samples, and audio recordings of the craft. We interviewed witnesses. We interviewed him, his family, the people living in the surrounding area. It was mind-boggling. So we brought all of that evidence back to the States and began looking for individuals that had the credentials, the knowledge, the equipment, and the background to really delve into it and find out what it could tell us.
For those who are brand new to Billy Meier, can you give us a brief summary of what happened to him?
Yeah. As a kid, he was 5 years old, and he looked up and he saw this disc in the sky. He was with his father, and he said, what is that? And his dad said, that's one of Hitler's weapons. It has to be. Well, Billy later had some telepathic contact with an individual who said, no, this is not Hitler's weapon. We come from the Pleiades. That was his very initial contact at 5 years old. But in 1975, he was sitting in the kitchen. He got a cooling sensation across his forehead. That's how he described it. And then he had an impulse to go get on his moped and go out into the forest. So he followed all of these instructions that he was getting, and they directed him all through little towns and into a very remote area. And he was standing there, and then he heard this sound. It was the sound of the craft. He looked up and he saw a disc, and slowly it settled down. And from behind it came a woman, and she was dressed in silver. She looked very human. The only difference, Billy said, was her ears came down into her jaw. And she introduced herself as Samyasa, a Pleiadian cosmonaut.
You know, it's very popular in the UFO world to hear about Pleiadians. Was Billy the very first person who ever spoke of them?
No, he wasn't. There were contacts going on in South America. that were having contacts with Pleiadians too.
But I mean, publicly, would you say that, like, out in the news, the word Pleiadian, did that kind of come from Billy's story, or do you think it was already out there?
It was already out there. The term Pleiades is what we call the star system. Pleiadian goes way back into history because there were supposedly beings that came to indigenous cultures to teach them. And that's where the word Pleiadian comes from.
Well, you made a documentary movie about it about 40 years ago, which I watched, and
Right.
you're re-releasing it. Why are you bringing it back?
Well, I think there's a difference in attitude now. And I think more people are open to learning about the subject. To me, one of the biggest things you can do, whether you're an investigator or just a curious person, is learn. So we presented the evidence in the documentary and also in a companion book, UFO Contact from the Pleiades, and let people make up their own mind.
Why did the Pleiadians choose Billy?
Billy told us, and this is something you can't really document, you just have to go sort of at face value with it. But he told us that they recognized his energy. They actually studied him for 10 years to see that his energy would be compatible with theirs, that he could feel comfortable communicating with them and them with him. But they said it was a past life recognition. And that's what that energetic recognition was all about. So at some point, Billy had a life in the Pleiades, and they all knew each other. So it was something that was comfortable to them. This is not new. We've heard this from many contactees around the world, that their contacts say, we've studied you for years, and we know you from another existence. So that was the primary reason that they chose Billy. But they said they were looking at several different people. But some of the individuals they didn't feel comfortable with because they were afraid that it would panic them. And that's something they did not want to do.
I think it's great that you spoke about that because I have interviewed about 700 near-death experiencers, and a significant number of them, after their experience, start having some sort of UFO or ET contact. And I feel like it changes something within their energy signature where they can either see them or they can be spotted by the ETs. And kind of, to me, what you're saying confirms that.
I think you're right. And from the ones that we've spoken to that have this past life connection, it seems to be something that's really important to not only the extraterrestrials, but the experiencer, in that there is a comfort zone that you normally might not have if you just had an extraterrestrial encounter. Where many abductees actually move towards the craft or whatever is there and sort of invite the encounter, there isn't a comfort level there. There is a block. But with Billy and with other contactees, it's like they're meeting old family that they hadn't seen since they were kids. It does make a big, big difference. And I have heard many stories from near-death experiencers that after this, they not only saw the extraterrestrials, but they also saw angelic realms and had communication with them. So I think this is something that really needs to be looked at in a deeper way, and not just set aside superficially and saying it doesn't matter. It does. There's something there that really needs to be examined, especially with so many people coming forward and saying this.
So would you say the Pleiades is a star or a cluster of stars?
It's a cluster of stars. It's a beautiful little cluster of stars. Today, we can only see 6 with the naked eye, but in ancient times, you could see 7. And they're like a little tiny, bigger Little Dipper. They're up in the sky at midnight, November 17th, directly overhead. And they are being chased by Orion's belt. Now, a lot of that just sort of created the lore and the mystery that goes with them. They are recognized in the Bible. They're called the Seven Sisters. Um, all of the indigenous cultures that we looked at have a definite connection to the Pleiades. It's quite interesting when you find the oral history, the myth, the legend of all of these ancient civilizations connect to the Pleiades.
Did they ever reveal to Billy what planet they are from?
Yes, they told him that they were from a planet by the name of Era that is circling one of the stars in the system, and that they had to engineer that planet. They originated in a system, Lyra, what we call Lyra, and they ended up fighting with each other and warring with each other, and they created something similar to a nuclear war that destroyed the planet. Many of them had an opportunity to leave, and when they left, they found places that they could engineer to create a homeland where they could exist. And that's how they got to Era.
Well, they sound a lot like us.
Very, very true. They are very much like us. They're a slightly different vibration than we are. So they're not as dense. That's the only word I can come up with, as we are. But they are capable of being on Earth for a period of time, but not for a long period of time. And the reason for that is something they call auric stench. And I love this description. But auric stench is the negativity, the anger, the frustrations that humans give off to each other. And that affects them. It affects them mentally. As Billy says, they turn around in their head. So they can only be there for a certain period of time. And then they're back on their ship and in their environment.
Did they ever reveal to Billy how long they've been coming here? And while I'm just on this question, are they responsible for creating us?
Yeah, them and many others. They have been here just traveling through space, is how they found our planet. But they did see this planet. They say their forefathers are our forefathers, which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense when you get into the indigenous histories of other peoples. Many different civilizations come into play there: Arcturus, Sirius, even Betelgeuse, which is kind of interesting because everybody associates that with the little gray beings. But the Pleiades, yes, they do come in and say that they helped inhabit the Earth.
When you say they seeded the earth, do you mean
Mhm.
that they brought their beings here, which are now us, or they genetically manipulated what was already here to create
Not that
us?
they genetically manipulated, they have children the same way we do. And they bred and interbred with the people that were already here. So them being here sort of escalated the development of the human being. And that's true of many different cultures as well.
How did they find us?
They looked through various planets, and of course ours is beautiful when you look at it from space. It's green and blue and wonderful cloud patterns and so gorgeous, so it attracts. In fact, Billy told us there were, in 1975, 105 civilizations visiting Earth at that time. So they found us that way, but they were looking for places to mine minerals.
Do you think that there are ETs walking among us now that are cloaking themselves or just look like us?
I do. I do. And I do think some extraterrestrial civilizations have the capability of becoming something physical that we can adapt to rather than looking like their normal form. I think I don't think that it's a massive invasion or anything like that, but I do feel that it is something that has been going on for some time. And I think they also sort of spur us telepathically. I know many different contactees, including Billy, talk about the telepathic communications that they have. and that they will get these impressions. And this comes from the contactees to do this or to be better at this or to different things like that. Nothing terribly negative, but they feel that it's coming from an extraterrestrial source.
Do you have any evidence to support that they're here?
Oh, not walking among us. No, I don't. I wish I did. That they have visited us, yes. The Meier case presents more evidence than any other case out there.
All right, well, let's get into his case. If you look at the photographs, they are amazing. And some of the debunkers will say they're just little models that he glued Christmas ornaments on or something. Can you talk
Right.
about that?
Sure. I love it when people say, oh, they're models that Billy made. No, actually, the investigators made the model. We hired Wally Gentleman, who is special effects for people like Coppola and Stanley Kubrick. And he made a model for us. And it's a small little model. We hung it on a string, on a pole, took photographs. You could instantly tell the difference with all of these things that were going on.
So you're saying there's no way you could fake it with a model?
No, the photogrammetric analysis proved that. What happens when you get into photogrammetric analysis? We first took it to Dr. Michael Malin down at U of A, and he digitized it. When he did, we could see the difference in the edges of the trees and the edges of the craft. So we could use that to triangulate and see how big the craft was. The craft was 21 foot in diameter. It was quite large. Then from the digitized photographs, we took those and we went to Robert Post at JPL. We went to various other individuals, Eric Eliason at USGS. They looked at them and they said, we can't duplicate this. We don't know what it is. We can't say it's a UFO. We don't know. But we cannot see anything that shows it's a hoax, nor could we duplicate it. That was kind of interesting. But when you put the model up next to one of Meier's photographs, the model's digitized edges are very, very small. Meier's photographs, the edges of that craft are quite large. You can count the pixels across. So you could see the small model versus the big craft. The other thing was you could see the string very clearly in the model that we had made and we suspended. It looked like a great shot. We took several different images, different directions, different locations, but you could see the string and you could see it was a small model.
Now, didn't you have his movie footage analyzed as well?
Yes, his movie footage was analyzed in Japan as well as here. There's a piece of footage I just love, and the craft is bobbling. He says it rides the magnetic waves of the earth, but it's bobbling over this little valley, and on the valley, this car is traveling down the road right under it. I just love that piece of footage. So yes, it all analyzed out too. There were no breaks in the film, no edits that were discernible at all. There's another piece where the craft comes at the top of the film frame, and in the very next frame, it's at the bottom. So you see this jump in time, but then the Pleiadians say there is no time. Time and space are null and void. So they can move faster than light, faster than we can, faster than we understand.
Didn't you administer some sort of lie detector test?
Yes, we gave him it's called a psychological stress evaluation. And it was done by a man that works for the sheriff's office in Colorado. Great guy. He gave us a list of questions to take to Billy and to read to him. And we recorded it. It measures the voice tremors and tells you whether someone is lying that way. It's very much like a lie detector test, a polygraph, but only it's your voice. And it was very interesting, the results we got. So when we administered the test, we asked Billy, is his name Edward Billy Meier? Does he go by the nickname Meier? Has he seen a Pleiadian craft? Has he met a Pleiadian being? And he answered all of the questions, very forthright, yes or no. We also asked him, do you drink coffee? And he said no. That morning, his wife had really scolded him, telling him he was drinking too much coffee. It was upsetting his nerves. She didn't want him doing it anymore, and he promised he wouldn't. The thing he registered as a lie was that he didn't drink coffee because he had been sneaking cups of coffee all morning long. So yeah, it was very interesting. Everything else came out truthful. He had met with Pleiadians. He had been to the craft. He had seen a craft. He had recorded it. Yes, the metal samples that he gave us to analyze were real. He was just very straight up on every question that we asked, except the coffee. And he was avoiding the wrath of his wife.
You called it a psychological stress exam or something. Is that just as accurate as a lie detector?
A lot of PSC people believe that it's even more accurate because what happens is your voice, you can't really control. It just happens. So when you're lying, it comes through and says you're lying. And it's the way the questions are arranged. It throws in good questions and bad questions all the way through it, very much like they do with the lie detector test. But I would say that it is equal to a polygraph.
All right. What about the metal analysis of the ship? What did that turn up?
That is what sold me that this case has serious validity and needs to be explored. We took the metal to a man by the name of Dr. Marcel Vogel. He worked for IBM, holds numerous patents. Great guy, but he had a scanning electron microscope, and he could really get into the metal to see what it was, as well as doing an analysis of it to find out if it had unusual characteristics. Did it have, was it all silver? Was it a combination of metals? It was a combination of metals, but the interesting thing was the metal was pure, and then there would be a crystalline structure, and then more pure metal. It's something that is a cold fusion process, which back in the 70s, we did not have the capabilities of doing. In fact, we're just developing that now. What we used to do with metal was melt it and pour it. So the crystalline structure and all the metals would have been commingled together. This was not the case. They were very distinct and very separate. When he looked at it, when Vogel looked at it through the scanning electron microscope, he could see the birefringent edges of the crystal separating the metal. That to him was really remarkable. The other thing that was remarkable was that there was thulium as one of the elements in the metal. Thulium is a rare earth element. It's very costly to extract and very hard to find. How would a simple farmer with a sixth grade education, one arm, know to get thulium in any form and incorporate it into a metal? One of the things as investigators that we have always done is, because we had a lot of pushback, people saying, no, the case isn't real. No, you don't want to believe it. That's okay. We asked people to duplicate it all. The movies, the photographs, the metals, and the audio recordings, which were very unique in their own right. At that time, we were working with a man by the name of Nils Ragnerud and Steve Ambrose. Steve Ambrose was Stevie Wonder's sound engineer. They could not figure out how to make that sound because it was frequencies, many frequencies coming together, peaking together, and then moving out. And even if we used all the synthesizers you could possibly gather, try to recreate it, you couldn't do it.
Was this the sound of the ship?
This was the sound of the craft. And it was taken not just by Billy, but by his wife. And there were also other people present when they were recording this.
This is probably one of the most interesting things about the tape is that there are
What's this right now?
very, very many tones.
Yeah.
And they're all changing very fast.
For a moment there, we were locking in and we had 3 evenly spaced frequencies. See it there again?
Yeah, you got them again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're saying that now we're able to create metal using cold fusion. Do you think the ideas about how to do it and even doing it at all came from Billy Meier's piece and or other recovered craft?
I think that definitely contributed to it. Another thing that we found fascinating was shortly after we stopped the investigation back in 82. IBM came out with their superconductive metal. It had all of the elements that Meyer's metal had in it, except they used, I believe it was boron instead of the thulium. That was sort of interesting too, but I could also understand it. And I don't have a problem with that. If we can learn and we can develop from not just the Meyer case, but all of the cases out there, then we are doing ourselves a service. And I think that they are providing this information, whatever it may be, so that we can learn and we can better ourselves.
Did they ever reveal to Billy what our future is going to be like?
They have something they call an event clock. If event A happens and event B happens, then event C is bound to happen. But if A happens and B doesn't happen, you've got wiggle room in there. So they could say, and we experienced this personally, they could say that Tito would die and when he would die. A general, not a date, a general time frame. Things like that. But they don't get into telling us our future because they do believe we have free will and we need to create that ourselves. We were present when, in fact, we were there with Shirley when Sadat, the president of Egypt, was killed. We were at the airport with her. We heard the reports that he had been shot by one man. We got back to the farm and we're talking to Billy, and there was this big cross on the TV screen and the Sturge music going on. And we said, what are they saying? And he says, they're wrong. They say it's one man. He ran in and got the contact notes, brought them out, opened up this big blue binder. And he says, here, it says, he will be killed in a military parade. And there will be many people involved. And that's exactly what happened. But that story didn't hit the press in Switzerland until the next day.
Have you followed up on this calendar? And if so, where are we?
I haven't too much. I talk to Billy quite often, and he's doing well. He's 87. But he, like me, says it's great to have an idea of what could happen in the future, but we already know it, and we need to create our own future. We need to be prepared, but we need to be better at what we do. And I can understand that position as well. I'm sort of there myself.
Do you think it's possible that Billy is a Pleiadian and that he just incarnated here as a human for this lifetime and they're not revealing that to him?
I think they might have revealed it to him. And I think many of us have had extraterrestrial lives, not just on Earth, but we have had lives that have taken us throughout the cosmos. Because to me, just from what I know, not just on my conversations with Billy, but other contactees and experiencers as well, working with Shirley all these years, reincarnation is something that is not limiting because the soul is not limited, the spirit is not limited. So you can have incarnated lives in other places, in other times. And if time and space don't exist, like the Pleiadians say, then you could really be having simultaneous lives. You could be having all kinds of experiences happening. And as Billy said, he told us one night, we were sitting around the table, and he was saying that the Pleiadians have a spiral concept of incarnations. So you start learning your lessons, which is what incarnations are about, and you move up through this spiral until you've learned all the lessons your soul needs. And it goes to each individual as to what those needs are.
Interesting. At that point, then what happens?
At that point, Billy didn't know, because we asked him, and he said at that point he did not know. He doesn't have an idea. Yeah, I'm sure he's probably asked since then, since he still is in contact with him, but he has not told me anything about it. We've had other conversations in other areas.
Did you ever ask him if he was able to get them to reveal themselves to you and your investigative team? And if not, why?
Yeah, because what they told Billy was he could not take anyone to a contact. He couldn't introduce them to anyone there because it would create a chain result where everybody would just want to meet. It serves no purpose. Their purpose was to provide him with documentation that we are not the only thinking beings in the universe. That was the bottom line to what they were trying to do with his contacts. And that was something that was very, very important to him, just to get that message out, that we're not the only thinking beings. And when you look back, 45 years ago is when we got involved with all of this. When you look back at it, the difference in time is remarkable. Because now we're talking about creating a civilization on Mars and then going further out into space. So yes, we need to be cognizant that we aren't the only thinking beings there. We need to be cognizant that their ways will probably differ from ours. We need to get over our arrogance that we are smarter and better than everybody. I think we can all learn from each other, but we have a tendency to think we're earthbound, we're the only ones there, and yet we're trying to go into space. And to me, that's kind of frightening.
Has the Swiss government contacted him?
No, but they have a military base right above his house, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, we actually went in and did some electronic sweeps to make certain that he wasn't being tapped. And he wasn't at that time. He was at a later time. And the line ran right down the hill from the military base to his house. But yeah, they keep an eye on him. They definitely watch what's going on. Back in the 70s, there were many groups watching what was going on with him specifically, because he was being so open and so direct about having contact with extraterrestrials at a time when nobody wanted to say that.
Do you feel that his story is the most important UFO story of our time?
I think it's one of them. I think, yes, it is very important. It's important to learn from it. That's, I think, should be the goal of everything that we do. But yeah, his is important because it has the evidence. It has the documentation. Whether you like Meier or not, and some people do and some people don't, whether you like the case or not, you have to consider the documentation behind it, the evidence behind it, and the fact that no one can duplicate it or explain it. That makes it really valuable.
Would you say that his case is the most researched?
No, I wouldn't. I would say probably Roswell is the most researched. Betty and Barney Hill, a lot of research went into that. Yeah, I think probably Roswell tops the list of everything though, because it was something here and something that affected so many people with the first signs of the government cover-up of UFOs. And whether you call them UFOs or UAPs, We're still experiencing that, even though the government is coming out and holding hearings. They're not telling us everything. I understand to a degree why they don't, because of national security and issues like that. But I also think that we as individuals can learn a lot more just by reading what is available, because there is a lot of information out there.
I think that there are still a lot of people on this planet that completely do not believe in UFOs at all. What can we
Yeah.
do to change their minds?
Keep talking about it. Bring things to light. I'll give you an example. This is back in the 90s. I had just come back from Mexico, and there were pilots and military people that were talking about the UFOs they were seeing down there. In fact, they had gotten on their FLIR cameras a whole fleet of UFOs while they were flying, like our Navy pilot did here. It was front page news in Mexico. When we got up here and we were talking to people in the news business, they said, no, no, no. First of all, it's Mexico. Second of all, they were getting ducks or something. Don't worry about it. It was their attitude. We got to get past that. We have to be curious again. We have to want to find out what is there, why, and learn about each other, them about us and us about them. I think the more information we can bring out to the public, the more curious they get, the more curious you get, then the more thought goes into this. Is it possible? But there are a lot of people that are moving in the direction now of, wow, because the government said yes.
Do you think within our lifetime, the ETs themselves will finally fully disclose
Wow,
them being here?
I hope so. I think we need them. I think we need some insight to ourselves. Yeah, I do. I think within our lifetime that we will see, maybe not landing on the White House lawn because we have AI to deal with now, which is everything is going to be questioned because of that. But maybe a mass sighting everywhere, I think that would be something that would get people's attention. I think we're past the point of the Orson Welles deal with UFOs landing, everybody go kill themselves. I think we are now curious, and we've got to start somewhere, and that's a great place to be.
Some people may say that, well, the government's waiting on us until we're ready, and then they'll disclose the UFO phenomena completely. But I think we're never going to be completely ready. They just should go ahead and do it.
I agree. I absolutely agree. The government is a great tool for opening a door. Just like they came out and said, yes, the Navy captured something on film. We don't know what it is. That's all they can say. But it does open the door to thought. And until we begin to think and really question, we have a tendency to get in these little mundane ruts of physical life, which is understandable. But sometimes you've got to look a little bit beyond. And I speak from experience. When the Meier case was brought to us and we said, no, it's too good to be true, that was us too. And it wasn't until Wendell went over and actually spoke with Meier and he came back and talked to us again. We said, okay, but then we went in to try to disprove it. We couldn't. So you have to go in with an open mind.
And perhaps once we all are able to recognize that they are real, collectively our consciousness will open up.
That would be great. That would really be wonderful. I think our consciousness is opening. I think we've been moving in that direction heavily for the last 20 years or so, with all the research being done on NDEs, on the research into extraterrestrials, into even dividing them into categories, which everybody wants to do, or they Nordic lookings? Are they little grays? Are they all different? Are they all like us? I think it's important, but our consciousness is growing, and it's getting to a point where we can really begin to discuss and go back and forth with each other. I think right now, one of the things that's really needed, this might sound a little strange, but we need a repository for all of the stories. Because it's not just the things with evidence that will inform us, it's also the stories, the experiences of people. And when you start getting into that, it's quite amazing. But nobody has a place to tell their story comfortably, to share it with others. And until we get to that point, we're not going to be able to learn to correlate, to see if the case back in 1950 has any relevance to one today. Things like that. And I know there are wonderful places like the UFO Reporting Center and even MUFON that collect stories, but we need to take all of those things and put them together and see what we can learn.
Well, that's kind of the goal of my podcast,
I think that's wonderful.
is to collect these stories.
Absolutely. No, I think this is wonderful. It's people like you that keep the curiosity going. Without question, to me, the curiosity is what will drive all of the information we get, whether it's metaphysical, whether it's about extraterrestrials, angelic beings, near-death experiences. It's people like you that keep that moving, touching someone new every day, bringing to light information others haven't heard. It's important.
Thank you. Did the Pleiadians ever talk to Billy about religion and God?
Mm-hmm. They call it the God force or creation. And they don't look at it as a single being. They look at creation as existing in everything. Very much like many indigenous cultures, that it encompasses everything, including the things that we create. It's something that we're a part of, and we need to recognize that we are a part of it and that we are basically co-creating our own reality.
Now, you've also done work in Mexico with UFOs. Can you tell us about that?
Well, down there, it was very interesting because Jaime Maussan, who was the editor general of 60 Minutes for a number of years in Mexico, has his own shows down there. He tracked us down and wanted us to come in on an investigation because during the eclipse of 91, there were 13 different people that from all over the city, Mexico City, took photographs and video of a UFO. Started a big deal in Mexico that today still goes on.
I think Jaime Maussan is still involved with bringing these mummified ETs to light.
Right.
What do you think
Right.
about that?
It's fascinating. I know he's having DNA studies done right now in Spain. They'd already done some in Mexico. Apparently the DNA was quite different. But now he's taken more DNA to Spain. The Peruvian mummies are very unusual because it's not just the head, which we all know is if you wrap an infant's head, you can shape it differently. But it was also the fingers, it was the bone structure, it was the total, not just the size, but the proportions of the body. I think he's onto something there. I think more and more things like this are going to pop up. They have happened in the past, but right now we have so much, everything is instantaneous with the internet that you get it right away. Before you didn't, but we had heard of this back in the 70s as well. Something else that happened, only it was in Bolivia. And it was a very similar issue with very small beings, different digits, only 3 digits on their hands. Their feet were different, their heads were shaped different. So I think there'll be more and more of it. But Jaime he is a dogged investigator. This guy will just dig and dig and dig until he gets answers. And I so appreciate him for that. Right now, well over 10,000 videos from Mexico City. And it's remarkable what's going on down there. We don't hear anything about it up here, unfortunately. But like in 93 on New Year's Day, the city of Reforma, which is the longest boulevard that goes right through Mexico City, came to a dead stop. People got out and laid on the hoods of their cars watching UFOs because there was what we call a fleet going overhead. And they were doing loop-de-loops around each other, making right-angle turns. It was on the news that night. It was the lead story on the front page of every paper the next day. We never heard a word about it here. And these things are still going on. But the people of Mexico have a very unique attitude. They sort of expect miracles. And to them, this was nothing different. It was something very nice. They're not afraid of it. They don't feel like they're going to be abducted or tampered with in any way. In fact, quite the opposite. There's a place in Atlisco, which is outside Puebla, Mexico. And they have a little hill called Casita Blanca. And you can go on Saturdays and mom and dad will have grandma and grandpa and the kids and their beer cooler and their chase lounges and lawn chairs. And they haul everything up the hill and they sit and wait for the UFOs to come in. Really something. So they have this wondrous attitude about it. And they take the time to look up. We're so busy, we're on our electronics, we're doing whatever it is we're doing during the day. We don't look up anymore. Mexico does. And many other cultures do too.
You also have a story about somebody being on a yacht or something and crashing into a UFO.
Yes, the man's name, he went by Stefan Tenarde. This was in just outside Den Haag. And he had a yacht in the North Sea and he crashed into a disc, underwater disc. In fact, there was an individual, a being that was killed when he crashed into the disc. And he felt horrible about that. But when he saw the beings, it frightened him because they did not look like us at all, nor did they look like little grays, which have been reported all over. They had a coxcomb. They had a face that was very much like a goat. Everything, all the communication was telepathic. They were upset, but not that upset. And they actually created communication with him. And at 3:00 in the morning, he would get these transmissions that were all basically mathematical equations. To them, God was a mathematical equation. He was an engineer. He understood many of the equations, but not all of them. And they said that they had been working in the North Sea for a long period of time. So they were called the Yargans. IARGA is the planet they reportedly were from. So yeah, that was one of the more unusual cases because usually you run into someone that is either Nordic looking or when you're talking to contactees or the little Zetas or little Grays. And sometimes those two groups work together. But we had never seen anything like this before.
What do you mean when you say that he had a coxcomb?
You know, like a rooster.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And, but still this face of a goat.
Wow.
Very homely creature.
Yeah.
It would be scary to see something that you didn't recognize.
Yeah.
And there are many people, I mean, even if you're having a contact with a Nordic looking being or a Pleiadian type, it could still be scary because it's so out of the regular. And it takes you into a place of automatic flight or fight, unfortunately.
Well, I think I've heard that just their frequency of being may be so different from ours that it just causes us to have fear.
It's true. It's very, very true. But I think a lot of it is the reaction, if you see the physical reaction. But a lot of times with the frequencies that you're talking about, this is so fascinating to me because all of them seem to resonate at a different frequency than we do. And yet some are high, some are low. And it goes back to the reincarnation question with Billy, because that frequency was harmonious to both. And so I'm wondering sometimes when I'm talking to contactees and experiencers, do they not have that connective frequency thing happening? Or is this something that maybe the other side that supposedly has this knowledge is not bringing forth to the individual? Because that could help people feel much more comfortable.
There are some people that will say that all the ETs are benevolent, and some disagree. Where are you at on that?
Middle ground. I think just like here, there are, for lack of better words, good and bad. There are some that feel it's better to control a developing situation or civilization, and some that feel that it's better to let it develop on its own so it learns its own lessons. And that's the side the Pleiadians are on. I do think that there's a lot of telepathic input that comes in from both sides. And I think that affects humans because thought, being the most powerful thing there is and the most creative thing there is, has to affect us in a way, whether we recognize it or not, it's there.
How did you come to know and start working with Shirley MacLaine?
Through the Meier case.
Really?
Yeah, she was so funny. She called, my husband picked up the phone. Lee says, yes. And she says, I've got your book. I want to go meet Billy Meier. And he says, look, lady, I don't care who you are. I'm not running tours. And he hung up the phone. She called back a couple hours later and said, seriously, I'm writing a book called Out on a Limb. I think he has a lot to contribute to this. So we talked about it. We'd just come back from 6 weeks over there. And we talked about it. And we said, okay, we'll take you back over. So we went and spent a week with her while she interrogated is the best word to use, Meier, because she is a question machine. She is one of the brightest people I know. And it's a perpetual question after question with her. Yeah. And she exhausted Billy. It was really funny to watch.
Well, if people want to watch the re-release of your movie, how do they do it?
Well, you can stream it by going to Beyond Words Publishing. They actually have it up on a stream feed, or you can buy the DVD, which is available at Beyond Words Publishing or Amazon or other places as well.
Now you have a book that goes with the movie too?
Right. It's UFO Contact from the Pleiades. It's volumes 1 and 2 put together as one big book. It's 200 pages, 12 inches or 10 inches square, and it is packed with photographs. So people can see and experience what we saw. But it also outlines Billy's story. It outlines the metal samples, how they were analyzed, the images, the photographs, and movie footage, how they were analyzed, the sounds. It gives an overview of all of the things that we did. And as I said in the beginning, I think it's important because as an investigator, you really don't take a position. I have my personal position on the Meier case, but you put the evidence out there as it was given to us. Here it is, and let people make their decisions.
Do you have anything else that you're working on that you want people to know about?
Wow. I just finished 3 books last year. I co-wrote a book with Deborah Jacobs on, it's called A Happy Move. It's just something to make moving easier because people are moving constantly now and they are always forgetting something. So this is for that. And then I wrote another one called Another Step Up the Mountain, which has just been released. It's I co-authored it with Deanette Wells. She's an adventure racer and climbed 7 summits, quite an amazing woman.
Well, Britt, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Oh, yeah. Don't stop questioning. Want to learn something new every day. And in that, whether it's about The world we live in, the world out there, yourself, your inner self. Just question some things and move forward. And don't be afraid to ask questions and to be curious. That's how we can progress.
Brit, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. You've been wonderful.
Thank you. So have you. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.